All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Picture this. The year is 1162. Deep in the frozen, incredibly unforgiving steppes of Mongolia, a boy is born. But he doesn't just arrive into a harsh world quietly. According to the accounts, he was born clutching a terrifying omen right in his tiny right fist, a dark, solid blood cloth. The local shamans took one look at this and immediately knew he wasn't going to be just an ordinary man. They predicted he was absolutely destined to become a legendary warrior, and they hit the nail right on the head. That boy holding the blood clot grew up to become Temujin, the man the entire world would eventually freeze in terror at the mere mention of, Genghis Khan. 10 million. In just 25 short years, Genghis Khan's nomadic army conquered 10 million square miles. To put that staggering number into perspective, he took more territory in a quarter of a century than the mighty Roman Empire managed to conquer in 400 years. He essentially built the largest contiguous land empire in human history, stretching all the way from the Pacific Ocean straight through to Central Europe. But here's where things get really fascinating, and honestly, it's a profound paradox that trips up almost every historian. On one side, you have a genocidal tyrant whose conquests slaughtered up to 40 million people, literally altering the Earth's climate through sheer depopulation. But on the flip side, you have a brilliant modernizer who instituted widespread religious freedom and the very first international postal service. So what's the deal here? Was he a ruthless monster or the visionary who laid the literal groundwork for a modern globalized world? Let's start breaking this down with Section 1, the Crucible, forged in poverty and betrayal. If we really want to unpack this paradox, we have to look at his origins. We have to see how absolute, terrifying desperation forged his ruthless survival instincts way before he was known as a universal ruler. His childhood was just defined by unimaginable trauma. At age 9, his father, who was a minor chieftain, was poisoned by rival Tatars. And instead of rallying behind the kid, his own clan completely abandoned his family to starve on the freezing steppes. They survived by eating wild roots and rodents. The desperation was so intense that when his older half-brother stole a fish from him, a teenage Temujin actually shot and killed him. Later on, he was hunted down by a rival tribe and literally enslaved. They locked a heavy wooden collar around his neck. But he refused to break, eventually making a daring midnight escape by hiding in a freezing river.
Which brings us to Section 2, the disruption, rewriting the rules of war.
So as Temujin grew into this fearless survivor, he looked around and realized the fractured, constantly warring nomadic tribes of Mongolia were their own worst enemy. To unite them, he completely threw out the traditional aristocratic rulebook. Instead of a system where only the wealthy, pampered nobles got to lead, he instituted a strict meritocracy. He promoted guys entirely based on their skill and loyalty. And even more radically, when he defeated enemy tribes, he'd execute their corrupt leaders, sure, but he actually integrated the defeated commoners into his own tribe rather than enslaving them. This strategy was a massive game changer. He turned the Mongol military into a terrifyingly efficient machine. Literally, every single Mongol man became an expert horseman and a lethal archer. We're talking about armies capable of riding for days, actually sleeping on horseback, and drinking horse blood to survive long journeys. All of this meant they could strike their enemies with absolute lightning speed. The system was so undeniably successful that in 1206, the United Tribes declared the 44-year-old Temujin their supreme leader, Genghis Khan. Moving right along to Section 3, the devastation, the Khan's wrath. With all of Mongolia finally united under his banner, Genghis Khan turned his sights outward, and this is where his brutal mastery of psychological warfare truly kicks into high gear. He operated like a master conductor, using a chillingly clear binary choice. If a city surrendered without a fight, he usually let them live. They were protected, they were fairly taxed, and life went on. But if a city decided to resist, they were made a catastrophic, terrifying example of his wrath. Take the wealthy Khwarezmian Empire in modern-day Iran and Uzbekistan, for example. They made the absolutely fatal mistake of executing his trade ambassadors. In response, Genghis Khan unleashed apocalyptic destruction. His armies literally engineered rivers to divert them straight through resisting cities, completely wiping them off the map. They used prisoners of war as human shields, and, quite famously, they built literal pyramids out of human skulls outside devastated city gates. It was a crystal-clear message to anyone else even thinking about fighting back. The sheer scale of his conquests is honestly hard to fathom today. Historians estimate that his armies killed roughly 10 to 11% of the entire global population at the time. Let that sink in. That is an astonishing, horrifying metric of systemic violence. In fact, the depopulation across Asia and Europe was so severe that massive patches of cultivated farmland essentially just reverted back to wild forests. This ecological shift was so vast that it scrubbed nearly 700 million tons of carbon from the atmosphere. It quite literally altered the global climate. That leads us into Section 4, the civilization, the Pax Mongolia. And this is right where we swing back to our central paradox. Because inside the borders of this incredibly bloody and violent empire, he simultaneously created an era of unprecedented peace and connectivity. Genghis Khan was smart. He knew a massive empire couldn't be run on terror and bloodshed alone. So he established what historians call the Pax Mongolica. It was a revolutionary period of stability, completely secured through some incredibly progressive administrative reforms. Despite being an animist himself, he instituted total religious freedom. Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, Taoists, they all held high ranks in his government. He created the Urto, which was this massive postal relay system, where writers carried special silver or gold passport tablets, giving them diplomatic immunity across thousands of miles. And he unified the entire Silk Road under one single government. Writers from that time actually noted that it was so incredibly safe, a person could walk the entire route with a solid gold nugget resting on their head and never once be robbed. Finally, we reach Section 5, the Echo, a secret, lasting legacy. In 1227, Genghis Khan died under pretty mysterious circumstances. Some say it was an illness, others say he fell from his horse. But his final orders ensured his physical resting place would remain a secret forever. The Mongol military took some extreme, almost unbelievable measures to hide his tomb. First, his funeral escort killed absolutely anyone they bumped into on the road. Then, they had 800 horsemen trample the grave repeatedly to erase any trace of disturbed earth. And, according to legend, they even went as far as diverting a river right over the site. Because of these incredibly thorough efforts, his tomb has never been found to this day, not even with our modern satellite imaging. But, while his physical tomb is totally lost to history, his genetic footprint is absolutely staggering. A famous 2003 genetic study revealed that a tiny but incredibly significant sliver of the global population, roughly 1 in 200 men alive today, or 0.5% of the entire male population, are his direct descendants. It's a sobering, wild reminder of the vast, systematic reach of his conquests. From a starving, abandoned outcast on the freezing steppes to a ruler who quite literally broke the world and rebuilt it in his own image, Genghis Khan is undoubtedly one of the most influential human beings to ever live. He was a brutal barbarian who weaponized fear to an unimaginable degree, but he was also a brilliant modernizer who fundamentally connected the globe. So, as we close out this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought to chew on. When you look at the absolute entirety of his legacy, does his creation of globalized trade, unified communication, and religious freedom justify the horrific cost of tens of millions of lives? It's a heavy question, and it's one historians are still hotly debating today. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep exploring the fascinating pages of our past.